They say the first Thanksgiving was in 1621. You've seen the paintings? Pilgrims and Indians gathered around groaning tables, autumn lights spilling gold over Plymouth, smiling faces, full bellies, a new world, blessed and bountiful. But if you dig through the old colony records, the ones kept in dim archives, their pages brittle as dead leaves, you'll find something peculiar, something missing. Welcome back to Whispered Chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore, where the past doesn't rest easy. The stories we think we know carry shadows longer than we were ever taught to see. The year after that famous feast. 1622, there's almost nothing. No celebration, no letters home, brimming with gratitude. Just silence. Cold, hungry silence. When history goes quiet like that, when a whole year gets swallowed up and forgotten, you gotta ask yourself why. This is the story of the Thanksgiving that never was. The year they buried. The year that was too true, too dark, too inconvenient to remember. Now, before we talk about what vanished, we gotta talk about what folks think they know. That 1621 gathering, it wasn't called Thanksgiving. Not by the Pilgrims, not by the Wampanoag. It was a 3-day harvest event. Part celebration, sure, but mostly diplomacy, strategy, survival. See, the Pilgrims had just barely made it through their first brutal winter. Half their people died. Half, they were weak, desperate, and surrounded by nations they didn't understand. The Wampanoag, led by Massasoit, they came to that feast with 90 men. The Pilgrims had maybe 50. And here's the part they don't teach you in 2nd grade. The Wampanoag brought most of the food. 5 deer, probably shellfish, eels, corn, squash. The Pilgrims, they might have provided some fowl maybe. This wasn't two equals breaking bread. This was a power negotiation. Treaty in the form of a meal. Massasoit needed allies against rival tribes. Pilgrims needed protection, food, and knowledge if they were going to survive another year. And back in England, investors were desperate for good news. They'd sunk fortunes into these colonies. They needed stories of peaceful, prosperous settlements to convince more people to sail across that cold, dark ocean. So the story got polished, got smoothed down, got sold. Plymouth became the success story. But here's the thing about selling a story. You gotta leave out the parts that don't fit. In 1622, it didn't fit. Let's go there now, to the year nobody talks about. At winter 1621 into 1622, the leaves had barely fallen when the news came up from Virginia. A rider, mud-splattered and hollow-eyed, carrying letters that made grown men go pale. The Powhatan had risen up. Coordinated attack. Swift. Brutal. Synchronized. In a single morning on March 22nd, 1622, they killed 347 English colonists in Virginia, nearly a third of the entire colony. Jamestown survived, but barely. Plantations burned. Families slaughtered in their fields. Now, Plymouth wasn't touched. There were hundreds of miles north, but the fear. Oh, that traveled fast. Suddenly, that alliance with Massasoit felt fragile. Every shadow in the woods felt like a threat. Trust turned brittle as river ice, and then the hunger came. Crops failed that year. The soil, thin and rocky to begin with, just didn't yield. They'd planted English seeds that couldn't take root in New England soil. The supply ships they were counting on, delayed, lost. One never came at all. By midwinter, they were rationing what little corn they had, eating clams till their stomachs ached. Boiling leather. Some say they gnawed bark off trees just to feel like they had something in their bellies. And then the sickness came. Fevers, chills, a wet cough that rattled through the settlement like a death rattle. They buried people in unmarked graves so the Wampanoag wouldn't know how weak they'd become. No feast that November, no prayers of Thanksgiving. Just survival, day by cold, desperate day. But here's where it gets strange. You'd think there'd be letters about this. Journal entries, records, Plymouth's leaders. William Bradford and Edward Winslow, they were writers. Bradford kept detailed chronicles of the colony's struggles. But 1622? Barely a whisper, a few scattered lines, vague mentions of hardship, but nothing about starvation. Nothing about the terror that must have gripped them after Virginia. Nothing about how close they came to collapse. It's like someone took an eraser to that year. And maybe they did. See, back in England, the investors, the men who owned the colony, they were getting nervous. The Virginia massacre had already spooked potential settlers. Word got out that Plymouth was starving, disease-ridden, barely holding on. The whole colonial project could collapse. They needed the myth, the story. Peaceful pilgrims, friendly Indians, bountiful harvests. So 1622 got edited, not officially. Not with some grand conspiracy, but quietly, selectively. Letters home were carefully worded. Bradford's later writings glossed over the worst of it. The narrative got shaped, sanded down, made marketable, and over time, that terrible, starving, terrified year just faded till it was gone. Now, fast forward a couple centuries, America in the 1840s, the country's tearing itself apart, north and south, slave and free. There's talk of secession, wars brewing, and into that mess steps a woman named Sarah Josepha Hale, magazine editor, writer, determined as hell. She had an idea. What if there was a national holiday? Something to unite people, remind them they're all Americans. Give them a shared story. So she started a campaign, wrote letters to governors, presidents. For 17 years, she pushed for a national day of Thanksgiving. And when she looked back through history for a story to hang it on, she found 1621, that 3-day feast, Pilgrims and Indians, harmony and abundance. Perfect. She left out the complexity, the diplomacy, the power imbalance. She definitely left out 1622. In 1863, right in the middle of the Civil War, President Lincoln finally made it official. Thanksgiving became a national holiday. And the version of the story that took root, it was the one that made people feel good, that fit the myth of American exceptionalism. Peaceful settlers, grateful natives, divine providence, blessing a new nation. But myths, they're built on what you leave out as much as what you put in. The violence, the disease, the desperation. The fact that within a generation, those same friendly colonists would be waging war on the Wampanoag, nearly wiping them out. In 1622, that starving, silent, terrified year. It didn't fit the story, so it stayed buried. So here's what we're left with. There was no Thanksgiving in 1622 because there was nothing to be thankful for. The colony was hanging by a thread. The people were scared, sick, starving. And the powerful men who'd invested in that colony, who needed more settlers, more money, more belief in the American dream, they made a choice. Not a loud one, not an obvious one, but a choice all the same. They told the story that served them, and the one that didn't, they let it fade. The Thanksgiving we celebrate today, it's not a lie exactly, but it's not the whole truth either. It's a story we've told ourselves for so long, we've forgotten there were other years, other truths, other voices that got left out of the telling. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. Not that history has dark chapters, that we're so good at forgetting them. History isn't just the tales we choose to pass down. It's the ones we tuck away, the years we skip over, the voices we hush, the truths that cut a little too deep to keep in the daylight. 1622 was one of those truths. A year swallowed by silence. A year scraped clean from polite memory. A year that still stirs if you listen close enough. So thank you. Truly for watching Whispered Chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore, and letting this forgotten chapter breathe again. If you'd like to wander deeper into the shadows of history, the pieces left out, the stories softened, the echoes forgotten, then I'd be honored if you'd subscribe and stay a while. There's more waiting for you here, more than most ever hear about. I would like to wish each and every one of you a happy Thanksgiving. Till next time, stay curious and stay safe.